thanks very much to IQ for the opportunity to do today's webinar on IQ control strategy harmonization. Really looking forward to this discussion. We were just chatting before the meeting that this particular IQ group, IQ Control Strategy Global Harmonization Working Group, has only been in existence since April of 2020, and the amount of work that has been brought forth by all of the collaborators in this working group, and of course through the leadership of this working group, it's been fantastic, and throughout a pandemic, which even makes it even more remarkable. So really excited to hear from our speakers today, and just want to spend a few moments just introducing them and getting going into the discussion. So our first speaker today is going to be Dr. Timothy Watson. He's an executive director and team leader for Pfizer and the CMC Advisory Office. The Advisory Office is a collection of Pfizer experts that provide regulatory and technical guidance to project teams to mitigate risks and integrate CMC policy. He also serves as a pharma topic lead on ICH Q9's revision EWG. He's also serves as an EWG member for the ICH Q11 regulatory guidance document and rapporteur for ICH Q11 Q&A starting material IWG. He's been members of many ICH groups and support ICH efforts such as Q12, Q13, and QDG, and he serves as Pfizer representative on the Pharma Global Quality and Manufacturing team. He is one of Pfizer's participating board of directors for the International Consortium and Innovation and Quality. He's currently the vice chair of IQ and serves as a co-chair of ISP Global RHQC. He has come to us with experience from Merrill Dow and Pfizer in the chemistry R&D group, and holds a PhD from Ohio State. Tim is the sponsor for this particular working group, and glad to have him on board for this discussion. One of the co-chairs for the working group and speaking second today is Keandra Robinson. She's a senior manager in regulatory affairs, CMC at Biogen, and she has over 15 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry. She has CMC experience in small molecules and oligonucleotide therapies, and has supported clinical and commercial products. She received a master's degree in regulatory affairs from Northeastern University and a master's degree in chemistry from North Carolina State University. As I mentioned, she's one of the co-chairs of this working group, and really excited to share with the large group we have, which we're really excited about, is with us. And I also want to mention Greg Rulo. He is also he's one of he's the other co-chair for this, and he is a senior director of regulatory CMC in AstraZeneca. Unfortunately, due to other obligations within his company, is unable to present today. But Greg has put forth a significant amount of effort as the other two, and want to make sure to recognize his efforts on this. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that very much. You go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the journey as to what this working group is about. As Tim mentioned, the group's been together since April 2020, but there was a lot of activity leading up to that, which sparked the idea behind this group. And many of us in our companies, in presentations in various forums prior to this, were giving examples where we would present elements of a control strategy that would get different responses from regulatory authorities in different markets. And we had a lot of discussion at various forums around what that meant for different companies. And we manufacture one product to one standard to one control strategy. So I like to say that at the end of the day, it's the sum total of all these markets' expectations on control strategies, such as parameters expectations, material attributes, specifications, in-process controls. All of those get collected together, and you're left with the lump sum of those that we manufacture to, and what we also say is the lowest denominator. We started sharing these examples independently as individual companies, and it caught the attention of some regulators in late 2018, asking us if we could share those examples. And we did so, and it caught the attention of ICH in June of 2019, And the response back from some ICH members was, is this individual company experience, or is this an industry experience? And we made a commitment at that time to go try to collect, to find out if these examples are more experience industry-wide or if they're specific to individual companies. So this working group kicked off, and we had some very pointed deliverables, which we're doing today, is sharing that data. The concept would be is to share these examples with regulatory authorities and industry, and we'll be looking for a path forward in dialogue on what we can do to improve harmonization of control strategies. So we all recognize that as we go through this, divergence leads to a, shall we say, a disincentive for innovation, and that's something that all regulatory authorities and industry are interested in moving past. So with that said, Keandra, next slide, please. This is the group of companies that has come together under IQ. We brought them together under IQ for a couple reasons. IQ has the legal framework and proprietary databases available and surveys that allow for sharing of information that keeps us out of the space of antitrust and intellectual property. So it was a perfect fit for this exercise for us to be able to code data mine our metrics on feedback from regulatory authorities. And so we have a nice collection of the companies on the screen here that have provided input to the data that Keandra is going to present today. So with that said, in the interest of time, I'd like to turn this over to Keandra to walk us through the data, and we're looking forward to hearing your feedback at the end.
Great, thank you, Tim. So before I dive into the harmonization and divergence examples, I would like to discuss the creation of a core document. When industry starts to prepare a dossier for a new drug application or marketing authorization application, the company starts with a core set of documents that complies with ICH requirements. The core set contains drug substance and a drug product. And these documents outline the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls that were developed for a product, and is commonly referred to as Module 3. As part of the submission process, when applicable, applicants, they take that core data set and they submit it to the agency. There are situations where we have to add different country-specific requirements, and we customize that package. We submit that to the agency, and the agency reviews it, and they have an opportunity to ask the company questions. The company defends their position, and then in the ideal world, your Module 3 is approved with no variance or modifications to the proposed control strategy. I would like to share how the working group gathered the data for harmonization and divergence. So the team collected data for both synthetic and biologic molecules. And the team wanted to focus on the ICH founded members. So we have the US, EU, and Canada, and Japan. And we also included Canada as a minimum for our assessment. And what we did is we looked back at our submissions that were submitted to the agency, and we wanted to focus on some of the key CTD sections that tends to have, we diverge from. And that's around the drug substance and drug product manufacturing process, control of materials, specifications, stability, also controls and critical steps. And what we did is we went back, looked at the data, and we asked ourselves, was your CTD section accepted by the agency with no modifications? And if it was accepted, we annotated that as a yes. If you had to modify your CTD section in proposed control strategy, that was annotated with a no. The data that we collected had about 62 marketing applications from the US, EU, Japan, and Canada. We also had some other data, but for this analysis, we wanted to focus mainly on our founding members, including Canada. And we had about 8 companies worth of data with 62 marketing applications. And what we saw here, on average, on if your core data set was accepted by the agency, on average, it was around 60%. There are some sections that had a higher percentage rate than others, but overall, what this tells us that industry can expect a divergence from their control strategy. So when we start to dig a bit more into the acceptance by market and CTD sections, we looked at the US, Japan, and EU. What we see here is that there's still a low likelihood that your core dossier will be accepted by any one of these markets. And granted, there ranges from anywhere from 46 to 69%, but really this overall 60% rate lets us know that there is a fundamental difference in understanding the control strategy requirements. And then out of our 62 submissions, when we start to look at the overall acceptance rates per section, when we look at our specifications for the drug substance and drug product, there's even a lower likelihood that your initial strategy to control the product would require some type of modification from the agency. The reason for non-acceptance of the core strategy, they range from starting material, manufacturing process and controls, our analytical methods, validation, and stability. And we kind of like to think of these as our pain points. But nevertheless, there is a fundamental difference on how the product quality is controlled. And these differences impact our control strategy intended to be a global dossier. Remember that core document set that I was mentioning earlier? So hopefully you will start to get an idea of what I mean by divergence. Let me illustrate this example for you. So for our CTD section, say we start off with 4 documents, and then markets ask us to change things here and there. We can look at different modifications for S22 where we are controlling it through 3 different versions, or another section may require 14 different versions that we're modifying and controlling to. And we could be looking at anywhere between a total of 24 versions. These country-specific requirements starts to constrain our manufacturing process, increases complexity, and it inhibits continuous improvement. And if we were to think about the future of the acceptance rate of our core document, this can drop significantly. Keep in mind the ICH requirement guidance are about 10 years old, and it's showing a growing divergence in control strategies amongst just the founding members. And when we look at standing members and regulatory members as well as observer, they will start to have their unique spin on control strategy requirements and expectations. And you can only imagine as we start to add new members to ICH, they may have a different state of creativity as well, and adds to different divergence. We also need to factor in products that have accelerated development and priority review. And this also reveals additional divergence to the initial control strategy. And then there's the unknown. So we think about the new guidance of ICH Q12 lifecycle management. And this may result into further divergence. We don't know. So let me go back to the data set that I just shared. Remember, we had 62 submissions, and out of that submission, we have 50 small molecules and 12 biologics. So if we were just to focus on the subset of biologic submissions, we wanted to just look at the US, the EU, Canada, and Japan. That overall acceptance rate of the core document is now 55%. And that's compares fairly well when we combine the two for small molecules and biologics, which is a 60%. So we thought, okay, let's add some more countries to the analysis. So we expanded to include some of the data set we collected for Switzerland and Australia, and that gave us a total of 72 submissions. And when we looked at the overall acceptance rate, it's still relatively stable at 64%. So what does this mean? This means we can probably continue to add more data sets. However, we're not expecting the acceptance rate to change drastically. Another thought is around our 60% acceptance rate is that could it be poor quality submissions? Or is it that industry is just simply asking for excessive flexibility in their core documents? Well, let's take a look at this table right here. Remember, out of the 62 submissions, we see a roughly even distribution between the US, Japan, EU, and Canada. And you can see here, you have a bit of a higher acceptance rate between the US and Canada. Remember, this is the same document that we submitted to the agency. They both received the same package. And then when we look at Japan and EU, we have a lower acceptance rate. So what really is the cause for this acceptance rate? We really are not sure, but what we do know is that industry and regulators need to work together to a common understanding of the appropriate submission content that is needed to support the control strategy. Obtaining a common understanding between industry and regulators is important because any country can impact the control strategy for the entire world. Remember, industry develops a single control strategy for one product, and this is then submitted to the agency. If any country wanted to change or have their own spin, this minimizes the opportunities for improvement. And remember here, our shared goal is to create incentives for rapid, continuous quality improvement to supply the patient. And as we think about the global pandemic that we're all in now, the importance of harmonization is essential when supplying the entire market. What we do know is that industry and regulators may have different view of the core document, meaning should we consider a regulatory's acceptance rate, or should we look at a company's approval rate for a particular section? If you recall back to that examples for S22, we have an accepted range of 17 to 87%. And so what we do know is that together, regulators and industry just have a shared responsibility to work together to improve our acceptance core strategy, our core acceptance document. So now I'd like to use this opportunity to share a few of the examples. I do have quite a bit of examples, so I'll just filter through some of them. We will share the slide deck with you, so you'll have all of it to look at, but I'll just keep going and keep an eye on the time. So remember, if you recall, some of the IQ control strategy, what we mentioned is that we observed some divergence in in-process control requirements for like non-critical process parameters. There's the proven acceptable ranges in design space, having the ability to change more than one parameter at a time. There's, if you recall, the low acceptance rate for specifications, and that's another area, drug substance starting materials, as well as country-specific requirements, let's say around stability. So for our drug substance development and manufacturing piece, we see that there are different divergence around selection and starting materials, meaning how far back do we go in our selection for starting materials. Some agencies are satisfied with the proposal, others want more or request to go back a little further. There's other things like additional CLAs or critical quality attributes or around our control strategies for process parameters, just to name a few. So if we were to look at this one example here for drug substance development and manufacturing, we had an oncology product where the proposed starting material contained 2 crystalline products that were justified by ICH Q11. And so what we found out is that 3 of the markets, they did not query the sponsor's strategy. They were satisfied with that. Another market was not quite satisfied with the proposal, and they requested more of the synthetic route under GMP controls to be included in the earlier step. The agency stated that the proposed starting materials did not meet their ICH definition, as well as a short synthetic route for the starting material and API. Eventually, the sponsor just agreed with the agency request, and also this impacted subsequent submissions. I'm gonna skip over this. I want to take the time to share this slide here around some of the data that we collected. In our spreadsheet, the team wanted to collect a tally of how sponsors are describing their drug substance and drug product description process. And what we noticed from here, we asked if you're using a combination of ICH terminologies, PARs, or you're not using, we're using non-ICH terminology. And what we see here from this table is that companies are presenting QBD-like submissions in their process. And they're staying away from the term design space, basically. This one is just some different examples around the drug product deviations that we see with different interpretations around IPCs and setting target points. I'm going to go to one of the examples that we collected here around the drug product manufacturing process, where the core section of P33 was accepted in some markets, and some markets did not accept the initial proposal. And what we found here for the EMA, they requested a commitment that the excursions outside the NORs and PARs in a multivariate manner will not occur, although they had design of experiment studies that would support this type of change. Canada requested information that was given at a step for only a single parameter at a time within PARs that will be varied within their operating target. And in this case, Mexico requested additional information around their packaging stability pieces. So this is another example where you can have a majority of the markets accept your package, and then another will have a different spin. Impurities and specifications are one that pops up quite a bit in our data collection, and we see quite a bit of variation with this. And I can just go straight into some of the examples, so it may seem a little bit easier to understand. So one is around the acceptance of our drug substance specification, where we have a couple of markets may accept the core dossier, whereas we may have a set of markets that may require a specific specification to be tightened. In this case, where we have a couple of markets that may request a tightened spec. And then what we are seeing is that industry eventually just applies that tighter spec to all the markets moving forward. So they just go ahead and make the proactive change for all the other markets that they're intending to submit to. So here's another example around process-related impurity specification. So here, the sponsor proposed a product specification level for a process-related impurity that it's based on some non-clinical data. So we have 3 markets that accepted the limit that's based, and they were okay with a qualification threshold. We had 1 market that did not agree with what was proposed, and they asked that the sponsor reduce the spec to no more than 0.15. Another market acknowledged the qualified levels for the 3 impurities, but they requested that the impurity be lower because it's been demonstrated in their batch results. And another market asked just to have all the levels be reduced at the same levels, and ultimately the sponsor agreed. Another example that the working group wanted to note is around analytical validation divergence. Some countries are performing their own analytical method validation, and they may request far more additional details, such as intermediate tests for validations or additional tests, things that we normally would not provide. And then there's also things like additional chromatograms and test procedures and reagents and solvents that we've noted in our data analysis. Another topic of divergence that's observed is around stability. And in this case here, where we have 3 markets that accepted the core, where we have 1 market that didn't accept the core. And some of these examples may not be related to this particular one, is that they request additional post-approval stability commitment, additional forced degradation studies, modifying or tightening the spec. We're seeing that lean stability is not being accepted in all the markets. And so this is just another example where we see different divergence between different markets. So in summary, industry has experienced a proliferation of regulatory divergence amongst established ICH members regarding the interpretation of ICH guidelines and control strategies. What we're seeing is that industry is forced to accommodate to country-specific requirements to gain approval for our Module 3 dossier. And we're just wondering, are these divergences really tied to patient safety? Most cases, they're not. And what we do know is that if industry and regulators work together to eliminate some of the country-specific control strategy differences, this will enable pharmaceutical process to be truly global that will benefit the patient. As I mentioned before, COVID has taught us that there is a need for harmonization, and it's really at the benefit for our patients. Another thought is that if there's more harmonization, it potentially can lead to fewer queries, and that could free up resources for both industry and regulators. Can lead to faster life cycle improvement to quality via post-approval changes, which is needed for continuous improvement, and hopefully prevent things like a stock out for different markets. So the Control Strategy Global Harmonization Working Group has not proposed any solutions at this point because we believe that industries and regulators would need to work together to implement meaningful solutions. ICH is committed to scientifically justified guidelines, and the intention really is not to reinvent the wheel here. Our focus is to just reduce proliferations of multiple competing standards and just to align on our interpretation and implementation between regulatory and industry. This slide's a little busy here, but it's intended to illustrate the cost of divergence. So if a manufacturing site is looking to consolidate test methods for a range of products, you could be looking at a total number you'll look at the total number of approved products and the cost that's needed to implement that change. And there's all things that's involved, and it can be very, very costly, and it can add to delays. And to the point that it just really limits the capacity and is it really worth now to implement this change, even though it may be faster or better? So in the end, the Control Strategy Global Harmonization Working Group is looking for consistent understanding of ICH expectations and implementation. And we've started to share this slide deck with various agencies to initiate the conversation. The working group has not dived into solutions just as yet, but we do know that we were thinking maybe there could be joint engagements or some type of mutual recognition of some sort that may help with a common understanding for the ICH expectations and implementation. But we do want to work with the regulators so we can reach a common understanding. I would like to thank you for your time. I would like to thank our working group members and our sponsor, Tim, and we'll take this time to answer any questions.
All right, so thank you, Keandra and Tim. And we have had some questions pop up already, and so I'll start to ask them, but please go ahead and keep the questions coming. Hopefully we can get through most of them in the remaining 20 minutes that we have. So first question we've had is, in a data set presented on the acceptability control strategy, do you have info on whether there have been pre-NDA MA consultations on the control strategies? Just saying that could potentially minimize divergence.
So I'll take a first shot as well. Keandra, you're welcome to chime in, and even Tim, you're part of this panel as well, so you're happy to chime in. Usually from our perspective at Pfizer, so the good question is, the answer to that is I don't think we have collected anything around the logistics behind the data. The data is just yes, no on terms of the acceptance of the control strategy. The working group is considering expanding and elaborating on some of the data. In terms of a pre-NDA meeting for a control strategy discussion, from our perspective, from my personal perspective, I think it's too late in the game to have that discussion. You're ready to file and you've got your control strategy identified. There may be some critical elements of that are worth discussion for a heads up, but for the most part, I would prefer to have that at an earlier date, especially when you'd have some discussion or some ideas of what that would be. The challenge with that is and I always say this, if I could work with one agency for a dialogue around a control strategy, that would be fine. The problem is trying to approach every agency with that same question is just not doable with resources and time. So you may pressure test that idea, say with the US, Europe, or Japan, but there's no guarantee that any other market is going to see the same result to that particular control strategy proposal. So, at the end of the day, I think the queries become the primary focus and area in terms of trying to gain clarification, dialogue, and justification with regulatory agencies for proposing a path forward.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tim. It's really around the queries, right? So you can have, like, say, the US will have maybe 20 queries, but then another market may have like 120 queries, and you're thinking, wait a minute, it's the same data set. So I'm not sure how a pre-NDA meeting will be able to satisfy every market. It just makes it more cumbersome, and yeah.
I think there's value in that, especially with continuous manufacturing coming along. There's a lot of good opportunity to discuss control strategies ahead of time, and that's been a positive opportunity. Again, the challenge with that is the how will the other 50 plus markets reflect that particular concept as well. So we've got some more work to do. What we're hoping in the future, especially with the Cumulus coming along, M4Q getting revised, that there's going to have to be some level of transparency. We're hoping to see some transparency between agencies so they can see what each other's concerns may or may not be. I don't think mutual recognition, straight mutual recognition is possible in terms of where one agency outright accepts a marketing application from another one's review. But we do think that some type of dialogue, communication, and transparency would help to move the needle in the right direction for more harmonized control strategies. The challenge we really have, as Keandra presented the one slide, is if you start getting customization of these control strategies to the point where we're being asked to add different elements, the first thing is it's hard to gauge what the risk the regulator is seeing to fill the gap, because the dialogue and discussion in a query process is fast and furious, and there's not a lot of opportunity to engage in productive dialogue to seek clarity. And second of all, when you add to the totality of all those together, what you looks like it was proposed as an enhanced control strategy development per Q8 and Q11 or something that was developed under the concept of quality by design is starting to turn into look more like a traditional control strategy when you look at the sum of everything put together. That means you're testing everything, you're adding every parameter in, and you're adding every in-process control in. And when you do that, it becomes a nightmare from a reporting standpoint and a compliance standpoint to make changes to your process in terms of which markets require notifications, which ones don't, what level of notification. So we're hoping at the end of the day that Q12 is going to be transformational and allow for the dialogue to move towards relative risk and allow for things that are lower risks to be managed more in the system, and things that are higher risk to be managed appropriately with the right notifications. So there's a lot of hope on the Q12 document moving forward.
Yeah, and I think I love the Q12 arguments. I know that's one of the things I thought would be great to come out of this discussion. And I think, in as you mentioned, the totality of the markets, I think sometimes also the multiple dimensions of a control strategy. There's many dimensions of it. And, typically, we'd sit together and we say, okay, what topics do we want to take for a pre-NDA meeting? You pick kind of your top 5 because you only have so much time and have so much. And so, there are many more than 5 questions you could potentially ask. So you got to kind of pick your best ones. And sometimes the questions we get are things that maybe we wouldn't have expected to be so much of a challenge. So, or just because there's just so many elements. So, moving on to another question. So the data showed that design spaces are not currently being claimed by industry. The data suggests more or less acceptance by regulators when design spaces are claimed.
Yeah, this is a long story as well, but I'll try to condense it. Design space. If I could go back in a time capsule and change ICH Q8, I would much rather focus the discussion away from design space and on control strategy. Design space was empowering the scientists to allow us to use the tools that we're trained to do, and that's use our brains to put together multivariate analysis. And we know that everything has functional relationships under dynamic scientific chemical processes. That's understood. The challenge is when we started trying to use the term design space, it came with different expectations. It started out with this request that you had to verify your design space at scale. They called it design space verification. And for those of you that are API small molecule experts that operate in batch mode, that's impossible. We're not going to repeat full-scale design of experimentations. That's a waste of money, time, and resources, and waste to the environment. So we had to figure out a way past that, and design space verification has evolved. But the second concept that hit design space was a link to the term itself. That if you use the term design space, you are allowed to use the knowledge to move multiple parameters at once. In chemistry, for example, it's dynamic. Kinetics teaches that. But if you don't use the term design space and you use the term par, that you would be restricted then to only moving one parameter at a time in your change management system, which contradicts the whole concept of dynamics in science. So as people were filing the term design space, it was coming back with different expectations. One region would accept it. The other region would say, please confirm that you would only move one parameter at a time. If it was rejected, then you would say you're filing a proven acceptable range. You can only move one parameter at a time. And it became a logistical nightmare in a pharmaceutical quality system to look at one product that has different expectations for change management based on terminology alone. Now I can say that at Pfizer and some of the other companies, we basically moved away from just using the word design space. We still do good science, multivariate analysis, and I know many of my parent companies in this presentation do as well. We like to focus the conversation back on the science and not on the terminology and checkbox concepts. So we've moved away from using the term design space, but the concept and data that we file is reflective of the design space. We still see even different responses to those. One market will look at it and evaluate it from the perspective of the science and the control strategy. The other market will say, well, we think you're trying to sneak a design space past us. Could you either elevate it to a design space or reduce it to a proven acceptable range? Again, one or the other mentality with not a dialogue in the science. And other markets, again, will basically say, what, you're not using design space or par, you have to pick one and use one because that's ICH terminology. So it's still all over the place in terms of design space, the term, and the use of that term. However, I would say that from a good science perspective, many of us still file sound scientific principles that are related to design space. What does that look like in the future? I'm hoping that the data that comes out of this could engage in a good discussion around some harmonization expectation around the implementation of what a design space means. If that takes place, I wouldn't have a problem personally revisiting the use of the term design space in a submission if there can be some regulatory global acceptance as to what that term means. And we move away from a checkbox mentality and back to focusing on science and risk, and doesn't actually control the quality of our products.
So I wanted to, actually, just because I think it's a good follow-on question, what you were talking about, Tim. So control strategy can be considered is multivariate at its core. The industry is much tuned to univariate controls on TQA. How much of an issue is a lack of understanding or agreement on what multivariate control means?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we first started with, quote, multivariate control, I can remember some great discussions back at AICHE, and engineers and chemists and formulators coming together to have that discussion. One of the problems we've had with that is I think it turned immediately into a statistical expectation that the only way that you could determine function relationships is through a full factorial DOE. Is that where we started? And to me, and to many of the scientists that looked at that, clearly statistics is an incredibly powerful tool when it's used at the right place at the right time, overlaid with the science and knowledge. So for example, in the API small molecule world, and I apologize if I keep coding that, but that's my background, kinetics is just as much as a powerful tool in terms of understanding functional relationships as a statistical analysis. And you can combine the two. So you don't have to do a full factorial DOE. You can actually use kinetics to drive multivariate understanding in the API world. And again, back to my comment, I feel like many times we try to take concepts in ICH and convert it into a checkbox mentality. If we're talking about multivariate functional relationships, the default shouldn't be automatically statistics and full factorial DOEs. The default should be what are the scientists' tools, knowledge, and ability using kinetics, thermodynamics, anything to come up with a scientific understanding of functional relationships, and that should stand on its own merit. And you know, we're all scientists in one way or another. And if I give one product to you, Tim or Candor, I guarantee we're not going to get the same result out. We have to recognize that. But there's no wrong answer. And I think that as we engage with different types of reviewers in different markets, we need to somehow engage in a more productive fashion and focus it back on the science. And does it actually assure quality versus you didn't run a statistical analysis versus you did run a statistical analysis. I think we got a long way to go. It's been empowering to scientists for sure to allow us to break down the mold of OFACs one factor at a time and putting together submissions based off of a conservative fear of being asked questions of detailed science. So clearly it's been more empowering to the scientists, the movement of multivariate quality by design, design space, and control strategies. But we have not seen value, the full fruition of value in terms of the regulatory market application alignment at this time.
And, next question, I think is great one for you, Candor, as like the co-lead of the group. So, did you discuss in the survey the impact of the attitude of the sponsor? Most of the time, sponsors just accept for the main markets for specific or diverting requirements in order to get easier approval. So, just kind of question about how the survey, and then have to discuss that.
Can you repeat that? You were breaking up a little bit on my end.
Sure. Did in the survey or on the team discuss the impact of the attitude of the sponsor? Most of the time, sponsors just accept for the main markets specific or diverting requirements in order to get easier approval.
Yeah, interesting question. So we are the working group. We're very sensitive to how the data can be perceived. So we want to make sure we present the data. I mean, the data is what it is, and so we share the data. But we want to be sensitive and recognize that there are some differences. And what we really want to do is bring awareness around these differences to start the conversation. And so we recently had a meeting with Health Canada, and they were really receptive of this information, and they wanted to know more, and they wanted to figure out, work with us, and they wanted to hear some of our solutions for solutions around this harmonization and mitigate some of that divergence. And that's really what we want to do. We want to bring awareness around this piece, get industry aware. The examples we're sharing are that of a collective. They're no longer just one company. This is a collective experience amongst the companies. So that is how we're like approaching it from that standpoint. And so there's been a lot of interest on what we're doing as a working group, which I think is good. And so hopefully that's how we're focusing on the data to bring awareness, start the discussion, and get to a solution for some type of harmonization per se.
All right, next question. I think, okay, so I'm going to say I think the answer to this is we won't know, but I'm going to say, Candor, you will be able to answer this probably better than me, but I think it's an interesting follow-up for the working group. So were there any of the examples part of a Project Orbis review? Did this impact consistency among various health authorities?
We did collect the data around if it was just normal review or some type of accelerated. We didn't dig too much into that, and that's something we can go back to look at as a committee. We do suspect there will be some type of change. We may not have enough data points. There may be only a few, and it may be difficult to make a fair conclusion, but it's something we have collected.
Yeah, and that's a really fair point. We call this data set, we like to refer to this data set as version 1. The working group is going to stay together, and we are open to ideas of other things we might be able to collect and or pull out of the data, like this insightful comment. So we're open to those, not only from our constituents at IQ and our member companies, but also from regulatory authorities as they get a chance to look at the data as well. We're very receptive to other ideas to look at the data. The one thing I think we're most excited about looking at is, since once Q12, of course, gets implemented and we get some examples with those, we do plan on collecting the same type of data to compare between markets in terms of what was accepted or changed for example, with respect to non-established conditions and established conditions, et cetera. But we're open to those ideas. So thank you for that question. That's something we can take back and consider.
I don't have any more questions that we'll be able to answer, but this one I thought was a great one to just throw out. I think, Tim, you wanted to lead with this one. Has this divergence added value in making quality of medicine better?
I like to believe, so maybe I'll spin that question around and turn it as a positive. I think that ICH, its journey, has clearly driven medicine to be much more quality, safer, and created a lot more awareness between global agencies. I think that ICH, the fact that we have new members and observers migrating towards ICH, is an incredibly positive step in the right direction. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we're focused on 3 markets under ICH, and now there is a pull and a want to learn and gain global alignment. There's a need to get access to patients globally a lot faster, instead of filing in one market and then filing in another market 5 years later. So I'd like to spin that maybe as a positive to say ICH, the journey of ICH thus far has been incredibly positive. I do think, though, we always owe it to ourselves in the world of continual improvement to make sure that we reflect upon where we are and don't become too complacent with where we are. And clearly this data is an attempt to do that. And it shows that there is still rooms for improvement moving forward in terms of gaining more global harmonization. As Keandra said, there's no greater example of the need for global harmonization in this pandemic. And I can tell you the nightmares of staying up late with this vaccine, trying to deal with all these agencies and different expectations being bombarded at you at once in terms of requesting changes and modifications, of which we can't do. But there's no difference in terms of commitment to patients and commitment to quality. And the COVID experience, in my perspective, just has exacerbated the need for better dialogue and improved transparency and a more effort, both from industry and regulators, to work together to get the needle moving in the right direction for control strategy harmonization. PICS has done this, so PICS is making that move. The inspectorate side has made a concerted effort to engage in some discussion around inspections, sharing of data from inspections, mutual recognition. If region A comes in and inspect it, it would be appropriate for region B to either accept that inspection as well. They're moving the needle in that direction. I understand GMPs is a little bit different than a marketing application, which comes with fees and compliance in each other region. I get that. But I do think there needs to be some playbook taken out for countries and regions to figure out a mechanism for us to be more transparent, to work towards a more harmonized global control strategy. So maybe I'll flip that to say there's a lot of good opportunity on the table. This data set, I think, reflects opportunities moving forward, and I'm optimistic that we will be moving in the right direction.
All right, Miley, do we have time for one more question? Thank you. I think we're all right. So I'm going to go forward. This
go ahead.
Last one would. Okay. Around so with the current status of Q13, I don't think we really want to get into what's the current status on Q13, but I think the follow part of it, how would the implementation, does it impact overall control strategy, basically Q13, the development of it?
I've always said that, that's a great question. Q11 still applies to Q13. There may be some fundamental differences because you're operating in a continuous mode. So there's different controls that need to be considered. There's steady state, there's divergence issues, there's GMP issues. And I think Q13, which will be hopefully getting to step 1 pretty soon, helps clarify or elaborate on some of the concepts that might be unique to continuous manufacturing, some of the more unique control strategy options. But in theory, Q11, as we've said all along, applies to both continuous manufacturing and batch. It basically says you have a critical quality attribute, and what are the options that you propose to control that? It could be parametric, it could be in-process controls, it could be attribute-based, it could be any mechanism that continuous manufacturing may be unique from batch history or not. So the concepts of choosing elements to control a CQA is no different for continuous manufacturing than it is for batch. What that may look like in the end is it may look very different because the in-process controls may be more emphasized in a continuous manufacturing fashion than it would from a batch API perspective, for example.
All right. Yeah, I know we've had discussions around the Q13, so I thought that was a really good one to highlight. I know that's something that we hear commonly even within Pfizer, and I'm sure within other companies. So I think that's a really good one to continue to have a dialogue. Okay, so there's lots of other questions. We are at 12 o'clock, so I think I think there's a way for us to respond back to these questions offline. So I will turn it back to you.
Any additional questions after the webinar, please feel free to send them to me and I'll circulate them to the team. Thanks once again to everyone for joining and to our presenters today and Tim, our moderator. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.